In the heartland of sub-Saharan Africa, farmers still hover on the brink of famine. 70% of the total population depends on agriculture to survive. Yet more than half live in extreme poverty. For them, a poor harvest is a life threat.
As the head of the family, I'm not happy to come here to receive food aid. But I've harvested 5 bags of maize only this year. And as I'm speaking now, all the 5 bags are finished. I don't have any food left in my house. I've got no choice but to come here.
Yields per hectare here are some of the lowest in the world, a result of poor soils, erratic rainfall and low input use. Limited scope for expanding cultivated area and fast-growing populations have further increased food insecurity in the region. The only way forward is increasing yields, yet farmers struggle. Old techniques, such as using manure to improve soil fertility, don't work anymore.
People planted on time, but we didn't harvest enough. Look, our maize was looking like this small. In the past, our grandparents were using maize stalk from the previous year. They would just add manure and it was producing nutrients in the field, but now, if you do this, it doesn't work anymore.
Naturally, our soils are not very fertile. So our soils have been degraded over the years. We've continuously cultivated our soils without returning the nutrients to the soils. So definitely there is a decline in yield with time. We need to improve our management of our soils such that use of fertilizers to improve our yields.
How could the use of fertilizers spread to this part of the world? How could it trigger Africa's green revolution? Today, there is an urgent need for the region to recognize the key role fertilizers can play in achieving food security. The problem? Prices are too high for most. We will travel across Malawi and Kenya to see what has been tried. How do you make fertilizer affordable? How to ensure its efficiency? And how do you make such programs sustainable? In Malawi, disastrous corn harvests both in 2002 and 2005 cost the lives of thousands. But in 2006, the country turned itself around. Malawi started producing enough maize to feed its population and even to export to neighboring countries. The reason for this turnaround? A subsidy program. The Malawi government took upon itself to provide cheaper fertilizers to its poorest farmers.
It takes the initiative of the government to say, okay, look here, gentlemen, we have a problem of food deficit. People are dying. Why can't we give people food aid in advance? This food aid in advance, it was in form of production. We produce the maize in advance, so that if maybe a certain area within the country, there's that food shortage, you can just shift it or reallocate the maize from one area to another. That was basically the idea of implementing the Farm Input Subsidy Program.
Malawi, which used to import food from as far as Brazil, started importing fertilizer instead, which proved to be cheaper. Every year, the government mandates private companies to import thousands of tons of fertilizers. Once in the country, products transit through the warehouses of the Smallholder Farmers Fertilizer Revolving Fund, a public institution responsible for storage and quality checks.
In this warehouse, we have all the types of the fertilizers that the Malawi government or Malawi as a nation needs. When it comes here, it goes through the process of this analysis and then the weight and the quality. And when that is done, then we are sure the farmer is going to get the right type of fertilizer and then he will get the best results.
When the planting season comes, the subsidized fertilizers are dispatched by truck all over the country. Fertilizer is not given free to the farmer. they have to pay 500 kwacha, approximately 5% of the commercial price, in the hope that they'll come back later to the shops on their own to buy fertilizer. In villages, people call it the fertilizer miracle.
Our lives have changed indeed. In the past, we would finish our stock of maize in 6 months. We had nothing to eat for the rest of the year. But now, for 2012, we still have some maize from 2011.
In 2005, people who were living below $1 were 52% of the population. By 2010, the figure came down to 39%. And the timing clearly aligns correctly with the period within which the fertilizer subsidy program was being implemented.
To keep costs down and avoid disrupting markets, Malawi's fertilizer subsidy is meant to be a targeted program. It is supposed to only benefit the poorest of the poor. But in the field, most farmers told us otherwise.
There is no fairness and justice in this program. Lots of poor people don't get the coupons, and even when you get it, you have to struggle to actually get the fertilizers. Sometimes we even sleep at the market to be the first the next morning. But often the fertilizer is already finished.
At first, village headmen and government officials were left to choose the deserving beneficiaries. Now, it is the entire community that takes the decision in an open village meeting.
This change in the system has brought transparency. Now we distribute the coupons in an open place where everybody is seeing what is happening. So the people in the village cannot have a problem with me saying I've given the fertilizer to people I know or to my relatives.
Another key challenge is the distance farmers have to travel to buy the fertilizers. Because private dealers were concentrated in urban areas, most farmers had to travel 20 to 30 kilometers to access the commodity. The government, helped by NGOs, created one of the largest networks of agro-dealers in the region. Their aim, bringing fertilizer to the farmer's doorstep. The program has turned more than 1,500 grocery shop owners, teachers and farmers into fertilizer resellers.
I have an advantage because I belong here. They know me. We speak the same language. I'm able to interact with them and they trust me.
Dina Kapiza is a teacher by profession. Her husband passed away in 1999, leaving her without any means to send her 10 children to school. She saw in this training a chance for a better life.
After the training, they linked me to supply companies. Those people were able to give me goods on credit. When I paid back those people, they trusted me and they have been giving me credit because now it's a good relationship.
Dina Kapiza not only sells fertilizers, she also shares her knowledge with her customers. Behind her shop lies a demonstration plot.
We teach them how to use fertilizer the way we were taught. For example, when you plant maize, we have been taught that if you apply fertilizer the very same day you plant your maize, it means you harvest 100%. But if you apply fertilizer after the seed has already germinated, you lose at least 5% of your produce. So in other words, it's a demand creating, because when you teach them how to apply the fertilizer, they will automatically come to you for advice as well as buying.
Agro-dealer shops have flourished in rural villages. Some sell subsidized fertilizers, but the majority are into selling commercial fertilizers and seeds, allowing farmers from all economic backgrounds to access the inputs.
When the program comes to an end, these people would continue. They are the people who are doing it on a business basis. They are making a profit. So we are like distributing or preparing a ground for a private sector operators to take off later on.
Almost 10 years after the launch of the subsidy, farmers in Malawi are now convinced fertilizers can make a difference. Starter pack and targeted inputs programs have also resulted in significant increases in maize production and reductions in poverty. One question remains: what will farmers do if the subsidy stops?
I want to continue using fertilizer, but I'll be struggling to buy it at the expensive price because most of us in the village are unemployed. So if the government stopped, it'll be very hard for me.
This raises concerns regarding what lies ahead. For economists, the subsidy may be a good short-term solution, but will it prove too expensive and detrimental to the Malawian government in the long run?
If we look at the budget of the Ministry of Agriculture, almost 70% of the budget is taken up by the subsidy program. So what it means is that some other important public goods, especially research and technology development, are sacrificed. It's not only the subsidy program that can be used to achieve food security. There are other alternative means, for instance, improved soil fertility management, the use of the private sector, etc. etc. Because if that could be done, then we could be in a position to scale down the program and still be able to produce enough for the country.
Investing in research, encouraging private investment, and public-private partnerships. It has been tried by a few countries in the region, and the most successful example is Kenya. In 1993, the government completely withdrew from the fertilizer market and abandoned price controls.
There was a need to encourage the private sector to take over the role the government was taking before. And it appears that since agriculture is the mainstay of the economy, the private investors found room.
This was the beginning of public-private partnerships. At the Kenya Agricultural Research Institute in Nairobi, a public research institution, scientists work hand in hand with fertilizer companies to make the inputs affordable.
The government cannot actually provide all the resources we need to do our work, so we are partnering with the private sector. We involve them right from the beginning when they are formulating their fertilizers. They may give us some fertilizers to test. We help them with analysis of the soil types.
Anthony Ensilaba and his colleagues work on finding fertilizer-responsive crops, new breeds which respond better to fertilizer and can increase yields. They say fertilizer alone is not enough. It needs to be combined with good irrigation and locally available manure. The results of their experiments are astounding.
This is an example of a plot without fertilizer. You can look at the height. It is shorter and it will not grow beyond here because of lack of nutrients. When I move to another plot, this one here, the maize are taller than me. They are deep green, which means they are getting enough nutrients supplied by the fertilizers we used.
The key to making sure farmers benefit from these findings, moving the experiments to the farms. Beatrice Njorage is currently hosting some trials on her property.
I did not want to use fertilizer because, like most people here, I believed it destroyed the land. But then some scientists came to us and asked to borrow part of our land to do some experiments. When I saw how good their crops were growing, I became very encouraged to use fertilizer.
We had to go on farm to work with the farmer from the beginning. So the farmer is learning as we work with him. So when we leave him, he will be able to know the stages of the work. But when you just go there and talk, he will not understand.
Smallholder farmers have started buying fertilizers. From 2002 to 2007, Kenya became the highest consumer in sub-Saharan Africa, with 16% of the total regional consumption. Companies like Maya Limited invested heavily in building facilities to import, blend and store large amounts of fertilizers. But in 2008, no one was able to import fertilizers. International market prices were so high, private companies feared no farmers, big or small, would be able to buy at those prices. The government of Kenya intervened and introduced a subsidy, threatening Kenya's fragile success story. Private companies now say they are fighting to survive.
We have introduced market distortions in this country because they get at the same price we buy, and then they get a subsidy from the treasury. They bring the fertilizer down, and it's open to every farmer. Therefore, we cannot sell fertilizers until the governments exhaust their consignments.
The company went to court to stop the Ministry of Agriculture from selling subsidized fertilizer to farmers, an attempt that was widely criticized. In March 2012, with the planting season coming up, the government could not distribute the subsidy because of the pending lawsuit. Farmers took to the streets, fearing skyrocketing fertilizer prices if the market was to fall entirely in the hands of the private sector.
Why the subsidy is important is because the private sector, as it is now, they may tell you all the good stories about farming, but the problem with them is that their profit margins are always very high, particularly when it starts raining. They all hike the prices by a very high margin. So you will find the farmers are helpless. A few will afford to buy the commodity.
But the Kenyan Agricultural Secretary says the government is not here to stay.
This ideally should be the role of the private sector. But when the private sector fails the subsector, surely the government cannot stand there and watch. It will have to come in. But as soon as the private sector organizes itself, and we are not just leaving the private sector alone, we are emphasizing this private-public partnership. It is through that partnership that we will ensure that the private sector has institutions that can manage the subsector without a problem. Because at the end of the day, what we want to be is a competitive country.
An alternative is helping farmers buy fertilizers on credit. In Kenya, in the tea sector, the country's main export crop, a company has been successful in setting up a credit operation. KTDA, the Kenya Tea Development Agency, is the sole buyer of tea leaves from smallholder farmers in the country. It provides fertilizers on credit every year to all its 400,000 smallholders.
We negotiate for credit from the bank as KTDA because we are able to provide a guarantee. But each farmer gets deducted. We translate that into a cost per kilo per farmer. And because they deliver their tea to us, we're able to recover that over a 12-month period.
The fertilizer is given to each farmer at the beginning of the planting season.
It's not free, we pay. But we pay softly.
From the fertilizer applying, the yield is good, so I get extra money to buy chicken, to buy goats, to buy cows, so I don't go to the shop to buy food. I usually get enough money.
We deduct all the costs that go towards procurement of fertilizer. And that includes the credit, the cost of credit. A lot of the times we have been able to deliver that fertilizer to the farmer at 30% cheaper than the market. I don't know of any other farmer who is able to get that kind of price.
But can such credit schemes be replicated to assist the farmers who market only food crops?
If it's a food crop, like maize, once you get the credit, there's no obligation to take the maize to the person who gave the credit. In most of the cases, that has been sealed by working through groups, what we call collective action, where the farmers access this credit through a cooperative. they link with the credit agency, a bank or whatever. And because the group members know each other, there will be peer pressure for everybody to pay back.
Each crop, each environment, each country is unique, and each will have to find its own solution. But experience shows that the government alone can't do it all. The Green Revolution will come to Africa through partnerships. Partnerships with private companies to invest in transport, build market infrastructures, or improve access to credit. Partnerships with research institutions and between ministries. Partnerships with the farmers to involve them in research, to educate them.
My dream in 10 years to come, I'll be able to buy a 1 acre of shamba, which is containing tea bushes. And that is my dream. And then my children will be educated, so I will not be having any stress, and I'll be free.